You are what you eat. Let that sink in. I'm sure every one of us here has heard of this saying at least once in their life before. I was in 5th grade when I first heard of this saying for the very first time. As an elementary school student, it was fair enough that I couldn't understand it at all. In fact, I thought that the concept of eating oneself was quite humorous. Nevertheless, it was a very widespread saying, so I decided to take it to my advantage, making it one of the main messages on a project I did back in grade 7. Project You Are What You Eat. Without understanding much of what it meant, I just slapped that metaphor on the back of a sustainable food packaging and called it a day. Understanding the deeper meaning behind the saying didn't bother me so much. After all, it had no relevancy to me, so why would I care? Which is quite ironic, isn't it? Because here I am, standing here, speaking about why you are what you eat is important to our daily life. Good morning, my name is Nicole Eleanor Setiady, and I am a grade 10 student. And today, I will be walking you all through the overindulgence of carbohydrates and sugars. Malnutrition. Malnutrition used to be a prevalent problem 50 years ago. Back in the 1900s, almost everyone, and I mean everyone, spent their days tired, weak, and frail. Sleeping with an empty stomach was common practice back then. However, as time went on, it became clear that malnutrition was slowly but surely starting to decrease. As we can see in this graph taken from Our World in Data, by 2023, less than 10% of our world experienced undernourishment. And even our home country, Indonesia, took a sharp turn, falling from 18% to 7% in 23 years. Well, let's be real, these are great news. But unfortunately, the problem has now flipped 180 degrees. What do I mean by this? As malnutrition was slowly healing in our world, a new and often overlooked problem has started to arise. Obesity. Yes, the problem of hunger has transformed into a problem of overeating. As we can see in this graph, obesity is on the rise. And with that, other illnesses such as heart disease and diabetes are also on the rise because they are obesity-related diseases. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you all a question. When you think of heart disease, what would you expect the main cause to be? Overeating fatty foods? Well, yeah, most people only pay attention to fat consumption. But the truth is, carbohydrates and sugars play a part much bigger than most people would realize. Furthermore, here in Indonesia, we love to eat our carbohydrates and sugars. You know what they say, it doesn't feel like you've eaten unless you've eaten rice. But not just rice, a lot of rice. And we Indonesians really love our sweet drinks and desserts. We used to joke around that people in Java don't drink tea with sugar, but they drink sugar with tea. Yeah, all this is really funny and all. But what's the issue here? What is the problem with eating a ton of carbohydrates and sugars? To answer this question, we must dive back into the basics. What are the effects of carbohydrates and sugars to the human body? Now, it is undeniable the fact that these two components are very important nutrients to our body. They fuel our body with energy, improve our digestion, and even maintain our serotonin levels. However, sugar can actually activate your brain's reward circuit, which will then release dopamine. Dopamine is a hormone that makes you feel happy. And that is why eating carbohydrates and sugars can feel so addictive. Aside from the psychological effect, overconsuming carbohydrates and sugars can actually bring about many negative physiological effects. For starters, a higher intake of added sugars and carbohydrates is directly associated to type 2 diabetes. For our context, type 2 diabetes is the condition where your body either can't produce insulin or can't use the insulin it produces properly, leading to high blood sugar. Now, when a blood sugar spike happens, insulin is usually released to control this effect. However, in the case of overconsumption, your blood sugar levels will be fluctuating throughout the day, and your insulin will be overproduced. When your insulin is overproduced, the cells in your body will start to tune out the insulin signal, which is also termed as insulin resistance. And when insulin resistance happens, let's just say type 2 diabetes is more likely to occur. Besides that, overconsuming carbohydrates and sugars can also contribute to heart disease. Although it is true that fat and cholesterol are leading factors to heart disease, what most people fail to realize is that overconsuming carbohydrates and sugars can actually lead to more fat than eating fatty foods itself. What do I mean by this? Let's give you all an example. Let's say you're eating this deliciously sweet martabak. The sugar in that martabak will be converted into glucose in your body and then transported into your body cells for energy. But in the case of overconsumption, you won't need that extra energy. So the insulin will end up telling the liver to store that glucose as fat. Yes, you heard that right, fat, particularly triglycerides. And when these triglycerides accumulate in your blood vessel and liver, heart disease is more likely to occur. According to the USDA, or the US Department of Agriculture, a higher intake of added sugars and carbohydrates is consistently associated with hypertension, stroke, and heart disease. As the saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. You cut back eating fatty foods to avoid heart disease, but still end up with the same disease just because you overconsume carbohydrates and sugars. So, what must we do? Is there truly an alternative solution that can give us as much as fulfillment and satisfaction as carbohydrates and sugars? Well, my friends, research shows that the answer to that question is consuming more protein. Protein is one of the 3 main macronutrients that our body needs. It is our body's building block. It repairs tissues, rebuilds muscles, and even supports our vital organs. Besides that, protein also digests a lot slower than carbohydrates, which means you will feel fuller for a longer period of time. In addition, protein is also very nice because you won't feel the same disadvantages as carbohydrates, like the spiking of blood sugar levels. According to a study published by the American Heart Association News, it can be concluded that protein decreases the risk of heart disease and instead improves heart health. So now, let's talk calories. According to the WHO, or the World Health Organization, a healthy percentage of carbohydrate intake daily would be around 50 until 55% of the amount of calories we eat in a day. As for proteins, it would be ideal for us to eat around 20 until 35% a day. Awesome! So now we know the healthy percentages of these 2 components. But how about us Indonesians? Well, the sad reality is that we Indonesians eat a whopping 70 until 77% carbohydrates daily. And proteins? We eat the small amount of 10 until 15% daily, which is way too little than our body needs. So on average, we Indonesians need to eat twice the amount of proteins we already eat today. But if you truly think about it, that shouldn't be too hard, right? We just need to increase the amount of proteins we eat and decrease the amount of carbohydrates. After all, who here doesn't like the taste of eggs and beef? But this raises a question. Why do we, as Indonesians, eat so much carbs in the first place? The answer to that is very simple. Simply because proteins are way more expensive than carbohydrates. But what can be done about this situation? I believe that we Indonesians need to create more incentives and programs for livestock farming, which will then increase the supply of proteins in the marketplace, and then therefore decreasing the price for proteins altogether. Now you might ask me, Nicole, wouldn't that cost like a lot of money? Well, yeah, but I ask you to consider our healthcare system, which is currently run by BPJS, where a huge part of our healthcare costs is completely covered. And given our ever-increasing epidemic of obesity-related diseases, the cost for healthcare will skyrocket. So, instead of that, why don't we invest in these protein production programs? The funding needed for these programs will be much less than treating chronic disease. To make this shift truly effective, I also believe that schools must play a part. Schools have an integral part in shaping healthy habits early on. That's why I think implementing regular health screenings would be a very practical solution. But these health screenings shouldn't just be about collecting data. They need to be followed through. What do I mean by this? For example, if a student is found to be obese or overweight, I believe that health staff and the school nurse should work together to monitor that kid until he or she is completely healed. With that, we can slowly move towards a healthier future. By combining affordable protein programs and a constant health monitoring from the school, we create a system where Indonesians are supported from a young age. But hey, it's not just about the money savings. We are lessening human suffering. So maybe the next time you go to that mall and see that tempting bubble tea, maybe consider saying, nope, thank you for listening.